I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, meeting is in order. Matt, you gonna start? Oh, you get back.
I got that before. We got this letter.
So, I asked Brady to come, on behalf of the town and get us caught up to speed with some things that are going on with IDEM that started, quite some time ago, so I kind of came in on the tail end of it. There were things that were already in motion that had been worked on, but I felt like that based off the questions that you had after last town council meeting, it would probably be a good idea to bring everybody into a room, kind of go back a little bit to where we started on this thing, through the construction first phase. Then there was a monitoring period that took place, and then there was action by IDEM for not meeting the qualifications of the accepted long-term control plan. So probably what you guys have seen is this starting to come through. This is actually an updated version, and Brady could probably explain this a lot better. I want to say this originally was from like October 2023 when this was submitted and approved by IDEM. Or maybe it was submitted in August and then approved in October or something like that. There were some changes that needed to be made to this performance compliance plan, the performance of our long-term control plan through past operator with inaccurate, we'll call it inaccurate paperwork and reporting that was done down there. We couldn't feasibly put together a project that would benefit the town and the town members based on the information that we were trying to utilize. So basically, Brady and the Commonwealth on their behalf, we submitted an extension to IDEM because actually probably the first one or two things we were already behind the 8 ball. Now, so I felt like it was a good idea to get everybody together and get everybody caught up to speed. I know there's been some regime change in the board, so the people that may have been responsible for that section back in 23 are now different. So it's just time to get everybody caught up. And so I think I'll turn this over to Brady and he can give us a timeline on this.
Thank you. Thanks for having us tonight. You probably know this guy, Rob, Brady Pryor, Commonwealth Compliance Manager. So in my former life, I was actually a CSO project manager. So I came to several visits here when I was with IDEM back in the day, and that goes on 2009-ish, I suppose. So along with Rob, several others at Commonwealth, we work with several CSO communities throughout the state. And what I tried to do in this handout was just kind of start with way back in terms of CSO policy and how we got to this point. So I'll keep it somewhat brief. We got to remember that we're basically tasked by IDEM and EPA to address a problem that's well over 100 years old, right? So here we are in modern day, but dating back to 1994, that's when nationally the EPA started paying attention to combined sewer overflow, what impact that has on water quality. And with that, the state of Indiana and IDEM basically followed suit with their CSO strategy. So all these requirements that we have are in our wastewater and EDS permit that's renewed every 5 years. So for the state of Indiana to comply with EPA requirements, they started putting in some front end report task, and the first one that you see there is combined sewer overflow operational plan. And what that intent was basically to allow cities, towns, CSO communities to essentially document what they were doing and what they had to minimize the impacts of CSOs. And the town complied with all those requirements, things like ensuring that you have proper operation and maintenance, you're controlling solids and floatables, you notify the public, and all those things. Then to take it a step further, in subsequent permits, then we had to do a stream breach characterization report. That's where you figure out what the impacts are to the receiving stream. And that's kind of really, behind what we're doing here. A lot of folks recreate, kayak, canoe in the river here, and we're trying to clean that up, so we want to know what the impacts were. So with that, was kind of the build up over several years with IDEM, EPA requirements, and then we get to the CSO, LTCP, long-term control plan. That original document was prepared well over 20 years ago. And then essentially what happened, that was prepared by EF&S. And what happened at that time is the state IDEM, the formal group that I was formally in, that there were state policy decisions and things like that that had to be made. And a lot of these sat on the shelf for many years, 5, 6, sometimes up to 10 years before anybody picked them up. And then kind of when Mitch Daniels was in office as governor, it was one of his initiatives to ensure that all of the combined sewer overflow communities in the state got under some kind of enforcement action, which is an agreed order. And that's kind of what we started with, is that's the agreed order that's referenced here that we're still under. Okay. So the town of Eaton was allowed a couple of years. It was the agreed order didn't really say what you had to do out of the gate, but the town council and the legal representation at the time reviewed it and signed on, knowing that there would be a couple of years to develop what the plan was. And with that, if you move on, so that was 2008. If you move on to 2010, that's when the approved plan was on file with IDEM, was basically a 20-year plan to basically convey and store these storms that are listed. And that's something that Mac and I have talked a lot about, reporting and things like that. And that's something that's unique with the town of Eaton, in that your level of control or your compliance is essentially a design storm, right? So it's 2 inches in an hour, basically, that we have to capture and treat, right? So that's those happen every 10 years, right? So it's really hard to determine when you're compliant with those, and we'll get to that stuff in a little bit. But essentially, later on, moving into 2013-14, I believe, is when Commonwealth, we started working with you guys, and we, I think, started off with a wastewater stormwater planning study to determine what the best solution was. And within that, ultimately, it was after a few years of study, back and forth with funding agencies. As you know, that's quite an orchestration to get all that done. And that's when our solution that was implemented more recently was basically a lot of sewer rehabilitation, sewer separation, with pump station, force main, treatment plant work. Simultaneously with that, that's when the state of Indiana, with a push from EPA, started looking at receiving stream nutrients. That's phosphorus. So meanwhile, as we're dealing with all these combined sewer overflow capital improvements, we get a permit that says we got to treat for phosphorus. So that was, you know, something else that we ended up adding to that project for compliance reasons. So as we neared completion, and what we did there is we really narrowed the schedule down from 20 years that was initially going to be, you know, let's say 2032 or so. We cut that with the project that we did, but then we had to get an extension because during construction, that's when we started encountering asbestos pipes and things like that that needed to be addressed from a public health standpoint. That set us on the pathway to this water project as well. But we finally reached completion of the project, the CSO LTCP in 2019. So that's probably a good place to start, to stop with kind of the summary of the history and see if anybody has any questions.
You know,
Well, Nick already talked. So I'm already caught up to speed. Brady's right. At some point I started wastewater operator. Actually, I was hired for the street superintendent in 2007. And when I came in, Larry retired and I took over. That was in that 2008 era. And Brady was correct. We submitted a long-term control plan through Butler, Fairman, Cypher. It sat down at the State House for several years, maybe 6. And then when they came, it was with an agreed order. It was pretty forceful, and they gave our long-term control plan back and said, basically, if you think you're going to pollute the river for another 100 years, you've got another thing coming. So that was kind of what, in a nutshell, our original treatment, our long-term control plan kind of stated. It took us close to 100 years to get into this situation and this progression, that it was going to take us another 100 years, and IDEM said absolutely not. So somewhere in this 2013, Butler Fairman was still an engineering firm when I left. So I'm kind of versed on what IDEM expected from our long-term control plan was to that 20-year plan of storage for treatment of the 10-year 1-hour rain event. But we had already reached a couple milestones when we discovered that there was a whole new thing that was kind of overlooked based on the information that Travis was having with the Commonwealth. We identified there were several issues at the treatment plant that we had paid for after our upgrade, essential items that we paid for the last year that weren't earlier identified as an issue because everything was just getting pencil whipped anyway. And so that's when we started utilizing what we knew we did have. We got to get some kind of, if the state or EPA says, listen, you're going to get to this no matter what. Now, you can pay $1,000 a week and you're still going to do it. And we would have to get it done. But at the level of control, may have been $10 million project, and we only need $1 million. So what we asked for is let us collect some data based on how much minimization and maximizing efficiency at the wastewater treatment plant in turn to minimize some of these unanticipated bypasses or anything that was less than that storm developed. That way we at least know where we're at. So that's kind of where we're at today.
Yeah, that's good input. And something too, so I guess to move on, so we finally reported IDEM completed construction in 2020. The end of May to be exact. And so what I do in these cases is that they do what they call a level of control review, right? So they look at the monthly reports, and those are for combined sewer overflow as well as the wastewater plant itself. And what they're looking for are precipitation events. So they're looking to see how much you had in a day, and they're looking to see how intense they were, right? They're kind of chasing that 10-year, 1 hour, say 2 inch an hour design storm to see how you're complying. From the wastewater treatment plant perspective, they want to see that you are maximizing your existing plant before you have a combined sewer overflow event. And there's one TSO2, I believe it is, that's right next to the plant. So they're basically looking to see whether or not you're maximizing flow, and then you're having those overflows. In other words, you're doing the best you can from a water quality standpoint. So they reviewed 2 years of that, a year and a half. So it was January of 21 through May of 2022. And there were several issues with that review. IDEM had stated, or case manager or CSO manager had stated that, they believe that several of those events were below the threshold which they should have been. But the problem, the issue with that statement, as Mac knows, and going through the reports, is that it was very clear that there were documentation and reporting issues going on. So the fact of the matter is that the compliance term that I then reviewed really can't be stood on, right? It can't be used to make decisions about where we go from here, and even whether or not you guys are in compliance. So the other thing to turn this sheet over, the thing that's kind of a red flag is that if you've got, let's say a good event, a half inch, or whatever the case may be over a shorter period of time, when you're not seeing the plant peaked out as it should be from a hydraulic perspective, that's a red flag that you're not doing the best you can with your facilities, and that also kind of tipped off IDEM as to what was going on planned or not going on planned. And there's something to when you submit monthly reports, you have the opportunity in those reports to state, okay, here's why we had it. Here's what our flows were at the influent of the wastewater plant. Here's what the precipitation was. Maybe you have 6 inches the preceding 2 weeks, so you're saturated. That factors into it as well. Snow melt factors into it. You have an opportunity to state why you had an overflow event. Bottom line is that wasn't being done. And, we frankly were unaware that stuff wasn't being done, but that is essentially what you stand on. IDEM sending you these letters to say, here are the conditions, and these weren't what we call compliance events. So that was basically in 2023 was when the level of control review was. I didn't put a date on that, but what we were tasked to do, and we got a couple of extensions on it, I can't remember. Usually they'll give you like 60 days. I think we may have ended up with well over 90 days because it took us a while to get our arms wrapped around what was going on with the reports we had and just kind of backtracking through whatever occurred during these events. So if we move on to those bullets, that's basically where we found several issues. And the first one has to do with the rain gauge being out of service. This isn't just a column or volumetric rain gauge you use. They're tipping buckets, so they give you that interval that you need, right? So you can tell what a 5-minute or 15-minute or whatever intense rainfall intensity is. There were issues found with clogging of the headwater streams. And then, several things, that I just touched on adding detailed narrative to CSO events. There were 5 organization issues that came up in inspections. We know we just couldn't IDEM requested reports, couldn't find them. There was still some missing. You know, when we had to do our evaluations and find them, they just didn't have reports. So without having, frankly, Matt or a new operator, right, someone that is willing to test the plan and push the plan and figure out exactly where we are and take those records, we were really at a loss of what to propose, yet we're on the hot seat with IDEM enforcement. There's a case manager there, but the CSO manager is primarily we deal with to get back with them, what we're going to do. And if you look at these bullets, that's pretty much where we landed with, okay, we need some additional time, but here's where we think we can make some changes. And that's where we knew that we had, Rob would jump in on some of this stuff, but we knew that, you know, we separated a good portion of the town, but we knew that there's another area or areas that weren't separated. So we thought, well, we'll look at those areas to reduce I&I, so the additional sewer separation. The other thing is that we needed to know whether or not the flow was getting to the plant, the interceptor. That can be tough here because you've got an upstream CSO that can discharge. So especially here where you get those multi-week, multi-day events, particularly in the spring, fall, or snow conditions when your interceptor can get overtopped, and it can be hard to figure out what's going on there. So there's some investigation that we thought would be good there. And then the other thing that we wanted to look into is evaluating the headworks. I think that would probably be a good time. So I know Matt's got several things that he's done over the last, whatever, couple of years or year plus to address that issue.
So basically, you guys are pretty much aware, because you probably heard me talk about this before. We have a screening system that is in relatively close proximity to our overflow. With such a small area, it doesn't take long for that to fill up. It has to pass through the screen to get into the plant. And what happens is branches, sticks, toilet paper, blocks the screen, straw, blocks the screen. The water is unable to pass through the screen. It dams up and then bypasses. The problem with that is if you're not maximizing your flow at your treatment plant, but you're showing bypass, like he explained, it throws up red flags. Well, part of the deal with IDEM is we're a minor treatment plant. They allow us to only be manned during one shift, 8 hours. So that means there's 16 other hours of the day where there's nobody at the treatment plant. If we get a lot of the rain events, especially if you get a dry couple days and then you get a big rain, everything that goes through the storm drains all collects down in the pipes and it all gets washed at once. So a lot of times it's important that we take care of that damming issue at the bar screen at the big push. Unfortunately, we can't pick when it rains. So it happens, a lot of our bypass events that have been recorded since I've been here, I'm going to say over 80% of them are after hours. So rains that continue to rain or the high flow, we've been able to maximize efficiency to where we can take over 1 million gallons a day through the treatment plant. It's the initial push that if nobody's there. So with that proximity and that whole equipment, first of all, it's several safety hazards, it's OSHA violations. There's several things wrong with that system. Part of it is we've got Bruce down here working. There's no air monitors for oxygen meters. There's confined space entry that goes along with cleaning those. So even during man hours, we run into this safety hazard where it could be not to mention the 16 hours of unmanned. So that's one of the things that was an easy, it was identified in 2008 that was a potential bottleneck to the plant. So that was one thing that was an easy one that we need to evaluate, get some newer technology, something that cleans that screen itself, that would require Bruce to get in a safety compromise situation or an anticipated bypass just because we got a big push.
So moving on, at the time, I think Mac took over as operator director in April 24, and we were still dealing with, okay, what are we gonna do with this compliance plan? And then we ended up coming up with the original version of the plan, which basically is very similar to this, except the dates have shifted. And that was basically, I want to say that was approved and submitted. It was approved, I believe, there you go, August 2024. That's a public milestone. Sorry, I forgot the year. But it was approved August of 2024, and that's what set us on the path of basically this compliance plan as you see it now. The thing that evolved, as I know, several things, but one of which I know on the, like, let's say the headworks or some of these other things, we talked about additional sewer rehab, I removal, and things like that that are in there in terms of evaluation. I know there was a meeting with Rob and Thomas Barclay, our business development rep, months ago about kind of what to do with the over process, and that's how that came up. But, meanwhile, when we're starting with very little records at all, and have someone that's stepping into the plant that's got experience with wastewater treatment, knows what to do, knows what needs to be fixed. And that's what's kind of been, I think, tremendous here, is that we're now seeing the plant maximized as it should be. But then from, I'm sure Bridget will tell you, that may not be easy on the wastewater account because things are, maximizing things need to be replaced. And that was kind of one of the things we went back to IDEM, like, look, all these things have been approved. I've got this letter for today, I don't know. This got it out. I don't know if this might, bring back some memories of both, I'm sure, expenditures and things that have been done. And we're like, look, IDEM, we need some more time to evaluate what we've got because we've been too busy, dealing with our facilities and keep it moving. And all these things here, you see on that next page, are critical. I mean, just absolutely critical, not only for CSO purposes, but during drive time, just meeting your permit. So that's kind of how we landed today. So I don't know if there's anything that I missed, but any questions? I'll let you all over. But I think something that's impressive, and I don't have the permit in front of me, but we were seeing on those reports, nothing over 500,000 previously gallons per day. And now Mac's telling me that he's, during wet weather events, showing somewhat instantaneous peaks of over 1 million, some sustained daily of 800,000.
Yeah.
So you put it through the paces, and that's what you've got to do to comply. Like it or not, I know we're a small community, and I know we don't have folks down there 24/7, but when we're on this CSO pathway, that's what we got to do during the wet weather events.
So prior, we were showing 500,000 gallons. Was that just because the reports were not accurate?
No, it was, we were hydraulically overloaded with solids.
Okay, so we were only actually getting 500 through, the rest was going places it shouldn't be.
I'd say 500 is probably an all number,
Prior.
probably close to around 430. Maybe.
But now we're seeing 800 to a million
What
plus.
wasn't driving up was the amount that we sent to the river, it wasn't treated, you know, and that's where now they're saying, I report what's there. We're running 1 million gallons through the plant and we bypassed this amount. I mean, it's just what it actually is. And I don't know any other way to do it.
Well, there isn't one way.
No.
That's how you're supposed to.
Hey, there's a Travis way.
You've gone from 50-50 split to the plant to the river to 95-5, maybe even better than that now.
Yeah.
And that's like crazy, that's what IDEM expects back to do.
Well, you can see the list of improvements that have happened since it came up, or we have definitely felt that.
Well, I feel like that's one thing,
But it's got-
I haven't seen that we were actually,
I didn't recognize that. I'm ready to go through that.
I think they did, you know, in this whole thing about evaluating and giving us an extension, they've seen this, and they know how much money that we just dumped into this and the financial burden that it placed on the town to get to where we actually are now. Now, whether that's good enough or not, time will tell. Basically, your NPDF permit says that you will bypass 0 gallons ever. And we don't know that we're gonna be able to achieve that with the system we have. So there's gonna need improvements on top of what we're already improved.
And that's the thing, that's where it gets in, like we're talking, they apply enforcement discretion when they see that you're, you know, peaking out facilities. The other thing too is like we have the severe storms here, tornadoes, power outages, and all that stuff. You know, that's out. You know what I mean? Like you're not expected to comply. You do what you can. And I know these guys do. You're just, you know, they understand you can't comply with everything. You get, you know, 7 inches of snow melt, or it's just the creek's way up. You know, those are the events I was trying to explain that, for lack of a better term, we explain away. We justify what occurred. They're beyond our control. And that's something it's been missing is just that, certainly that reporting aspect, but, you know, really thinking about how to convey that, document that, and now we certainly have it, so.
How much is that grade? That grade plate?
Bar screen, the automatic bar screen.
Automatic bar screen.
It's really expensive.
They're not.
With parcel.
I'm just trying something right, I didn't.
Well, there's some newer technology that, when you think of bar screen, automatic bar screens, there's very basic, but in terms of what you think about is how much do you want to let go through and how much do you want to capture? So they have tiers. Something like what we got, that's the bare bones, then you go up into auto, but maybe 1.5 inches, so anything under 1.5 inches still can go through our pumps. Do you try to get something that has a smaller or a high capitalization to help us with some of the grit that is non-existent, that removal in our treatment plant, even though it's still listed as a treatment process on our permit? Then you would get into a higher level, but I had talked with Brian Panther last Wednesday, he came in, he brought me some brochures just to get some ideas. Kind of ballpark figure for a high capitalization is probably gonna be about 500,000. So,
The other thing to think about in that same vein, and that will attest to this too, downstream of the stream, which is how your plant is plumbed now, are the pumps that send everything up to the top of the well and gravity back down, right?
yes,
The technology on the pumps and the impellers, the internals of the pumps has improved dramatically as well. Like, you guys probably have the flight in impellers, right? They've significantly improved over time such that it affords communities like you guys, maybe don't buy the Cadillac screen, right? Knowing that you can let certain things pass through because your pumps can take, right? So there's options available to you when you're trying to look at a big picture. There's, when I view all this paperwork and I hear the history of what he's had to do and what you guys have had to do over the last couple of years, I'm sitting there thinking, all right, the time of chasing water out of the collection system, that ship sailed. We need to figure out how to deal with the wastewater plant. And getting rid of that bottleneck at the head of the plant is like step one, right? So let's set it up so that it doesn't back up in the middle of the night and cause an overload that's unbeknownst to anybody. But then once we get past that, we still got to get everything to the top of the hill. And I'm sitting here thinking, how can we help him further maximize how he pushes water through the treatment plant, either by storing or improving the pumping technology or screening or all of them. It's kind of like, see this thing. And there's other stuff that needs to be addressed along the way that's first.
they don't see that good luck with capitalization. They do such a higher magnitude that this is unreal. They have 26 CSOs that they're trying to combat. But the problem when you get into thinking in terms of, okay, do we want to capture the water, do we want to do additional separation, what kind of fell on the town was, we had a system that was put in mostly by the POW camp out here originally, and we had a failing infrastructure. So it didn't make a whole lot of sense to do a big capturization when we still had a failing infrastructure. So Commonwealth came up with the idea that, hey, based on this, we need to separate storm from sanitary. What it could look like later, I mean, the problem with it is we're kind of landlocked on the, we can't put some big ass tank down there at the sewer plant just because there ain't nowhere to put it. I mean, when you think in terms of capturization, which is not a terrible idea, basically capturization, you can show IDEM that you're doing primary treatment because it's going into a container. So let's say the primary treatment is screening. There's no chunks of stuff. There's no tampons or nothing floating in the river, okay? Then when your plant gets to a decent level, we can start bringing this flow in. So your flow rates are higher on a day-to-day basis because you captured everything that would typically be in the river. So Muncie did a little bit of both. It works out pretty decent in that. It's like filling a bucket. Once you reach that, you got primary treatment till your bucket's full, and then you go into the bucket, and then it's overflowing anyway. So it does well with short periods. It doesn't do well with 7-day snow melts. Just because you're maximizing your flow a lot of the time anyway, so you don't get a whole lot of time to bring it back in. So there's going to be options. Whatever the cost-effective way is, then we'll have to go with, but this is not going away.
Bridget, have we heard from like climb Peter at all
Today,
today?
I spoke to him on the phone. And I just told him pretty much wait till after this meeting, and we can give him some more direction, because the Oprah grants, we have to get, he's gonna get something in the paper like pretty quick, because the one is in August, and the other one's in December. So, sounded to me like he didn't, either way, of course, Rob has to find with him which way we're going, but we gotta give him some direction on how fast we're gonna move. And I want to have that discussion with you guys tonight on, we need, the next steps on how and when, what we need to do.
So if the thought is to develop the next phase of this as maybe like $1 million project, not maybe we'll do that before, that's, that $1 million, 1.1 million is kind of a sweet spot when you're talking about Oprah. And I say that because, Oprah is a matching grant, but you get up to $750,000. So it would be Oprah plus some sort of local contribution, whether it comes from borrowing a couple $100,000 or cash on hand, or a combination of all, or something, right? But that, if we're to get access to that money, you gotta, update, write a report, and that's what Mike's talking about. The next Oprah offers grants also, the $750,000 grant I was talking about is for construction. They also have grants available for planning, writing a report. And that, those next rounds of applications for those planning grants, the first one comes in August. And it would be very aggressive at this point to try to make that coordinated with, but I don't know where he stands on the surveyor and that stuff, but just his effort.
Today to start the, today and be.
Basically, it needs to publish on Fridays, what he told me as well.
Yeah.
Otherwise, assuming Brady and Mac can keep IDEM at bay and do some dancing, then we'll target December or end of the year timeframe to apply for the planning grant. Which, if it works out, gives us a little more time to figure out, we get the grant to do the study, to look at what options make the most sense for MAC and town. The report, not to get too far ahead of myself, the report would be written in a fashion to not just include the bare bones minimal, right? It's not just to include a screen or redoing some pumps or some storage. It's gonna capture everything, but it's gonna present it in a fashion that you can phase it in over time if need be based on affordability. And after you do a first phase, you kind of hit a pause, take a step back and see how successful you were, and then maybe reprioritize the next steps, maybe jump ahead or something else. But you write a report to put anything and everything in there that sets you up as funds become available, you can go pursue them. But knowing going in, I want to do this first, right? I want to eliminate the bottleneck ahead of the plan, figure out how to avoid these unnecessary discharges of CSO2 and improve operationally our ability to move water through the plant and still leave it permanent when it helps out in the river. That's kind of the goal here. But to get there, you would want to pursue the grant so that you're not paying anything out of pocket to write this report. That's where Mike comes in. That's the decision that needs to be made. You want to kind of try to ramrod something through the newspaper on Friday, or you want to see if we can buy a little time. Really wrap this up.
Well, I don't want to ramrod anything. We need to, now that we've got someone who's capable and can get us the right info, we've got good numbers, we know what's going on. I'd much rather try to get us to December where we can at least have more data and really have an idea, from Mac and Brady on, what is it we really need. In priority, levels.
Well, I tend to agree. We got one portion of this already figured out. We gotta do something with that bar screen. We know it's been identified as a bottleneck. If the town completes the override thing and they decide that the bar screen, maybe you can do the bar screen and do another little project, and then, like you said, kind of say, hey, we did this, or we're gonna kind of step back and, hey, how successful did that make us? The one thing that you would clear up immediately by having this automatic bar screen is the unanticipated bypasses. That's where David does a backwash at the end of the day and on dry weather, and it pushes and it dams. And then we get a small portion of rain and our flow meter only goes up to 200,000. Our design is 360,000, but yet we showed a bypass on that day. So eliminating those by themselves, I feel like we would be a huge step ahead for when the rain comes. Be a little bit more prepared. That initial flush has come out, it's coming through the plant instead of a 45-minute delay, which your collection system continues to fill, and those CSOs are basically like pressure reliefs. Instead of popping manhole covers in the road, we go over a weir and discharge prior to the plant. The plant's performance is we're taking all that plant play. During the man time, when we're able to clean the bar screen every hour and keep the flow running through the plant, the numbers are good. If there was a way we could take more, our treatment-wise would still be good. We're in the high 90% removable BOD suspended solids, probably close to 100% removable ammonias. We're getting the treatment, and we got, I want to say we did 10.13 million last month, which was 101% of the plant's capacity. And with those levels of treatment. So I think just based on the things that we can identify right now, that bottleneck at the bar screen to eliminate unanticipated bypasses, that would be probably duly noted in the records that we get up until whenever we're going to do the second part. But ultimately, it's going to be your guys' decision what path we go. I'll keep trying to crank away what we could crank away at the plant. Brady's doing a good job on educating me on some of the bureaucracy of some of these plants. I mean, we write these up not for just us to go in there and read them and understand. You need somebody to help break it down and kind of layman's terms, and Brady's done a good job with that with me. There's some things that maybe I thought was one way, but it actually was something a little different, so. But we have identified that issue. So do we decide to push on for this? And I don't know.
Well, that's a big portion of what we think we need to do next, I mean, cost-wise.
I will tell you that our dry weather flow for 2024 was about 110,000. And our flows during wet weather are at least 5 times that. So we're getting I&I, we're getting combined sewer from somewhere. So, I mean, that's another thing. It looks like they guys have already identified during the first phase that we did this and this, but there's still this over here. But we didn't know what these two were going to do until now. But there is a significant difference from wet weather to dry weather at that plant.
5 times.
Probably.
Yeah. Yeah, big rainfalls is worse. We know that by the numbers.
Yeah. So, just to build on that, I mean, when we, like I said, we went through that first level of control review with IDEM, and we started digging in, okay, you know, where could these flows be coming from this area? It gives you kind of an idea of what was done, and then some areas where we were planning on evaluating, where we knew it was outside of the project area, essentially. So it's kind of what you see listed on these bullets and stuff we're gonna do. I mean, that's one of the things we're prioritizing, the I stuff, which is what Rob indicated would be revisited. I believe that the PDR, to kind of look at what, you know, if anything comes next, we don't know. But that was provided IDEM back in like 23, we started digging around. If you have more questions,
Can I take a picture of this?
yeah, we can send it. You can have, yeah, you keep it.
Sure.
We can use it.
So I didn't know.
See, that's what I don't understand.
Well, I think based on everything that we've learned tonight, we kind of know where our next steps are. I think we need a motion to approve the next step on the planning grant submission.
Can you repeat that, Roger?
Yeah, I said that based on, I think, what we learned tonight and today, the educational process that we've got. The income survey we've already approved, that should be done. Okay, it's not ours. So that's a check mark there, but the planning grant submission, I think, since we know our biggest expense is gonna be that, bottleneck with the bar screen, we know that has to get done. Maybe a few things thereafter, I think, I'd like to see it. Us go ahead and somebody make a motion to approve the planning grant submission.
I'll make the motion. I thought we already did it. Sorry.
Megan makes a motion for approving the next stage here, getting our planning grant submission.
Awesome.
Daniel second. All in favor? Aye. All three of us were in favor. Well, I appreciate all you guys coming to give us an update, know where we are, and, give us a little more education on what we gotta do to get where we need to go. I mean, I'm very proud of what's happened since Max come on board, what's happened to that plan. I know we've spent a lot of money, but when things are not taken care of or they're broken, they sure can't, just look at what we're putting through that plant right now compared to what we used to put through them. If we would have had real reports, prior to that being here those 2 years, that could have been real scary, to be honest. I mean, we don't know, especially with some of the things that we've had to replace that was causing big issues. I mean, it was not running very well at all. And of course, we were all in the dark, the board as a whole. But I think we can get a better grasp on it. We've definitely got an operator that knows how to make that plant run well and knows the steps necessary. So hopefully we can move forward this planning grant and see if we can get it better. We just, hopefully IDEM will understand that we're doing everything we can. And we're going to continue to do what we can. Because our goal is to have nothing with it there. I mean, that could be an impossibility, but we're going to continue to work on it until we can get it. The levels we have today are phenomenal compared to what has been the last 100+ years. And so, in my opinion, it's going to get better. So.
And Bruce, thank you for your work as well and all your learning.
Have you seen those screen lately?
You know I have to ask. I'll start calling every couple hours. I'm back when we call you tickle screen.
Back in the day, everybody did everything. We could call a story and say, hey, man, when you guys go down there and get your fuel or whatever, you gotta clean the bar screen.
Okay, anybody got anything else they want to say or any questions?
Along this path, though, I can assure you from our side of the table that we will do a better job of keeping you guys in the loop and engaged.
Yeah, these things make us nervous when we get them and we don't have any heads up. And everybody in a frenzy for a minute.
Sure.
And I met with Mac and, he wasn't all happy. And, last thing we want to do is we got a guy that's able to run the plant, he's not happy.
Yeah, that's what I tell my staff all the time, you can design the greatest wastewater treatment plant in the world, but the operator's not happy, it's not going to work.
Exactly. And they got a character. I mean, our goal is to make that thing hum, and it is humming. Compared to before his arrival. Just amazing that we have a person in there that knows how to do it, and just how much improvement we have. Megan's in the ton. A lot of grant too. They're going to help them.
Bruce Lee.
You better watch out how much you're willing to acknowledge you learned, because you might get that phone call.
I've been trying to stay out of there. My stuff, I always look to use vehicles there if I stop by.
I'm proceeding to move closer.
Last time, Hey, last time Daniel stopped by. Bruce ran over his car. So we have good time.
I wasn't gonna say that Daniel did tell me not to park next to Bruce's truck. Yeah, I was parked in the grass. So they wouldn't, they ended up getting hit. They come and tell me that he knocked the mirror off. I said, well, we better go look. I said, yeah, hell. I said, what about the door and the fender? I didn't see that, I just didn't hear it.
Okay, I need a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, Megan for the second, all in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
Okay.